The air over Malta shimmered in the afternoon heat of April 1942. Beneath the harsh Mediterranean sun, engines howled above the limestone cliffs as small dark shapes tangled in the sky. Flight Lieutenant Dennis Barnum gripped the control column of his Supermarine Spitfire VC, the fighter shuddering with vibration as tracer rounds lanced past his canopy. He had already fired at a German Junkers Ju-88 bomber, seen one engine bloom into fire, then turned into a Messerschmitt Bf-109 that came screaming down from the clouds. His radio crackled, then went dead. Alone and hunted, he eased out of a dive and lined up another burst. The enemy's wings filled his windscreen. He squeezed the trigger. The Spitfire's 8 303-inch Browning guns roared together. Metal tore, smoke twisted. The German veered left, trailing fire. "Dash the man," Barnum muttered through clenched teeth, hauling the stick inside the turn, firing again. The sky exploded into chaos. More 109s slashed in from the right. Barnum's Spitfire jolted, the Merlin engine coughing. Flames licked along the cowling. The world flipped. Sea and sky traded places. He fought the spin, opposite rudder, stick forward, leveled out barely above the waves. Another explosion. The cockpit filled with smoke. The control surfaces went slack. The Spitfire was burning, falling. He considered bailing out, but the island was so near, Halfar airfield just ahead. The engine seized. Barnum cut the power, flattened the descent, and slid across the runway in a shower of sparks, canopy cracking but alive. The wrecked fighter came to rest amid acrid smoke. Another day survived. Another debt added to the ledger of war. Barnum's combat that day became one of many legends around the aircraft that symbolized Britain's defiance. The Supermarine Spitfire. Sleek, fast, and graceful in the air, it was far more than metal and fuel. It was an expression of a nation's resolve at its most desperate hour. Yet its origins lay not in glory, but in quiet engineering rooms and wind tunnel experiments long before the thunder of 1940. 2 decades earlier, the Royal Air Force itself had nearly vanished. After the armistice of 1918, Britain dismantled its military machine. Many in government saw no need for a separate air arm. The Admiralty wanted the aircraft returned to naval control. The War Office argued for the Army to absorb the pilots and machines. Only one man, Air Marshal Sir Hugh Trenchard, fought to keep the RAF independent. His persistence preserved the institution that would one day defend Britain's skies. In the coastal town of Southampton, a young engineer named Reginald Joseph Mitchell worked for Supermarine, a company best known for elegant seaplanes. He was pragmatic, driven by precision rather than fame. By the early 1930s, Europe's peace was crumbling. Germany was rearming, and the British Air Ministry issued a call for a new fighter, something far faster and more agile than any biplane. The requirement demanded a single-seat aircraft capable of 310 miles per hour and armed with 8 wing-mounted Browning machine guns. Mitchell began sketching a radical design built around Rolls-Royce's new 12-cylinder liquid-cooled engine, the PV-12, soon to be named the Merlin. He used an all-metal stressed skin structure and a thin elliptical wing to reduce drag. Every line served aerodynamics. When the prototype, designated Type 300, rolled from the hangar in March 1936, its smooth fuselage gleamed like polished steel under the Hampshire sky. On March 5th that year, test pilot Captain Joseph "Jock" Summers climbed into the cockpit at Eastleigh. As the Merlin roared to life, few onlookers imagined they were witnessing the birth of an icon. The aircraft lifted easily from the grass field, banking gracefully over Southampton water. The controls felt light and precise. Summers later reported, "I don't want anything touched." Minor adjustments followed. But the verdict was clear. This was something extraordinary. When the Air Ministry examined the prototype at Martlesham Heath, its performance surpassed expectations. In June 1936, officials approved the name Spitfire, a term meaning a spirited person, though Mitchell, disliking sentiment, thought it a silly name. The first production order soon followed, 310 aircraft for the RAF under Expansion Scheme F, Britain's urgent plan to rebuild its air power before 1939. By the time deliveries began, Europe was sliding toward catastrophe. Mitchell, meanwhile, was dying of cancer. He continued working in pain until July 1937, refusing publicity and leaving the future of his design to his deputy, Joseph Smith. Smith would refine the Spitfire through every variant that followed, ensuring it evolved with the war itself. As 1939 opened, new Spitfire squadrons formed across Britain, number 19 at Duxford, number 66 at Coltishall, number 74 at Hornchurch. Pilots trained in formation flying, gunnery, and combat tactics under grey English skies, unaware that within months they would fight for their country's survival. The months leading to war were a study in tension. Across Europe, dictators rose, borders trembled, and diplomats stalled for time. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Britain declared war 2 days later. The phony calm that followed, the phony war, masked an approaching storm. By the spring of 1940, Nazi forces struck west through Norway, Belgium, and France. The Wehrmacht advanced with terrifying speed, supported by the Luftwaffe's dive bombers and fighters. The British Expeditionary Force, sent to aid France, soon found itself trapped. The evacuation from Dunkirk, Operation Dynamo, became both a miracle and a humiliation. Between May 27 and June 4, 338,000 troops escaped the encirclement, ferried by warships and civilian vessels. Above them, Spitfires and Hurricanes fought running battles to hold off German bombers. The men on the beaches often cursed the RAF for seeming absent, but most of the fighting occurred inland, where British pilots met the enemy before they could reach the coast. The skies above Dunkirk saw the Luftwaffe's first major setback of the war. When the last transports cleared the harbour, Britain stood alone. France had fallen. The invasion of the British Isles, Operation Sea Lion, loomed. Hitler's generals drew up plans, but before any troops could cross the Channel, the Luftwaffe had to annihilate the RAF. What followed would decide the course of history, the Battle of Britain. The RAF's defense network was far more advanced than the Germans realized. Across the coast stretched a chain of radar stations known as Chain Home. These early warning towers could detect incoming aircraft nearly 100 miles away, giving Fighter Command precious minutes to scramble interceptors. Once radar operators spotted enemy formations, the information traveled by telephone to Fighter Command headquarters at Stanmore, then to group and sector control rooms. There, women of the WAF moved colored markers across large maps, tracking raids in real time. Controllers then ordered squadrons to intercept. To prevent friendly fire confusion, British aircraft carried an identification friend or foe device that returned a distinct signal on radar screens. The coordination between radar, ground observers, and fighters formed a defense system decades ahead of its time, a nervous system connecting pilots, operators, and commanders into one living organism. By July 1940, the Luftwaffe launched its first major assault. Waves of bombers crossed the Channel under escort from Bf-109s. Spitfires climbed to meet them, slicing through the clouds in tight formations. Hurricanes targeted the bombers while the Spitfires tangled with the fighters. The battle raged from the white cliffs of Dover to the fields of Kent. The British held a crucial advantage. They fought over home territory. Downed pilots could parachute into friendly soil and return to duty. German flyers became prisoners. But the odds were daunting. Germany had nearly 10,000 trained pilots. The RAF barely 1,450 in Fighter Command. Airfields were bombed daily, aircraft factories hit, radar towers attacked. Still, replacements arrived, many from the Commonwealth, others from occupied Europe. Poles, Czechs, Canadians, and New Zealanders all took to the skies beside British comrades. Inside Lord Beaverbrook's Ministry of Aircraft Production, civilian repair units worked around the clock. Mechanics salvaged wrecks, patched bullet holes, and returned fighters to service in record time. Car factories turned to aircraft assembly. Women riveters and engineers, many fresh from domestic life, kept the lifeblood of the RAF flowing. August 1940 saw the battle's fiercest phase. German formations bombed London, Portsmouth, and the Midlands, seeking to cripple morale. Yet each night, the capital's skyline still glowed with fires, and each dawn, Spitfires rose again. On August 20th, Prime Minister Winston Churchill addressed Parliament, his words destined for history. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. The phrase immortalized the fighter pilots who defended Britain's freedom. By October, the Luftwaffe shifted its strategy from airfields to cities. The Blitz had begun. Though London suffered nightly raids, the failure to gain air superiority forced Hitler to postpone his invasion indefinitely. The Battle of Britain ended in victory for the defenders. The Spitfire, once a prototype dismissed as experimental, had become a national symbol. Its elliptical wings, perfectly balanced for maneuverability, made it the envy of the world's air forces. Pilots described it as part of oneself, responsive, alive. But the war was far from over. In early 1941, the RAF shifted from defense to offense. Rodeo operations sent Spitfires across the Channel to bait German fighters into combat. The new Messerschmitt Bf 109F matched the Spitfire Mki in performance, leading to the introduction of the Spitfire Mach 5 with the more powerful Merlin 45 engine. In the summer of 1941, reports came of a new German aircraft tearing through Allied formations, the Focke-Wulf FW-190. Faster, more agile and heavily armed, it dominated the skies. RAF losses mounted until upgraded Spitfires began to match it. The race for aerial superiority became a constant struggle of adaptation, design, and bravery. By 1942, the war had expanded to every corner of the world. The Spitfire, once Britain's shield, now became its sword. By 1942, the reach of the Spitfire extended far beyond the British Isles. From the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Burma, its silver wings became familiar sights in the skies where Allied soldiers fought and died. What began as a weapon of defense had evolved into a symbol of persistence, a machine that adapted as quickly as the war itself changed form. In the vast expanse of the Mediterranean, the tiny island of Malta stood like a stone anvil in the path of Axis supply routes. Whoever controlled Malta could strike at convoys feeding Rommel's Africa Corps or protect Allied fleets moving east. The island became one of the most bombed locations on Earth. In its defense, Spitfire pilots lived on the edge of exhaustion, their aircraft patched together with parts from wrecks, fuel rationed, and runways cratered by daily raids. It was in Normandy, this cauldron, that Flight Lieutenant Dennis Barnum and others fought desperate battles against overwhelming odds. Their sorties often began before dawn and ended in flame or triumph before noon. From the sand-covered airstrips of Egypt to the mountains of Tunisia, squadrons of Spitfires guarded the advancing Allied columns. The aircraft proved versatile: interceptor, escort, reconnaissance, and ground attacker. In the baking heat, engines struggled, and mechanics worked under tents to keep them operational. The roar of the Merlin echoed through the desert like a hymn of defiance. The engineering brilliance of the Spitfire lay in its ability to evolve. Designers at Supermarine, under Joseph Smith, created continuous upgrades, new wings, armament changes, superchargers, and the eventual Griffin engine. Each variant carried the same soul, but new capabilities. By 1943, it was as lethal as any fighter in the world. That year brought another challenge: the German V-1 flying bomb. Unmanned, pulse-jet-powered, and deadly, it crossed the Channel with a terrifying drone before dropping from the sky. Londoners called it the Buzz Bomb. The first appeared in June 1944, and within days, Fighter Command had designated 11 squadrons to intercept them. The Spitfire's agility was an advantage, but speed was critical. Many pilots resorted to desperate tactics, nudging the V-1's wing with their own to upset its gyroscope and send it crashing into fields. Later, Griffin-powered Spitfires could finally outpace the missile, catching it in level flight and shooting it down with cannon fire. But long before D-Day, the Spitfire had already shaped the coming invasion. Throughout 1943 and early 1944, the 2nd Tactical Air Force used it to cripple German communications in France, railways, power lines, radar sites. On May 28, 1944, 62 Spitfires struck northern France, clearing the way for Operation Overlord. When the morning of June 6 arrived, Spitfires soared over the beaches of Normandy, patrolling the skies above the largest amphibious landing in history. The invasion's success owed much to the years of experience earned since 1940, while British and American troops advanced in the West. Another front demanded attention. In 1942, the Soviet Union received its first shipment of Spitfires from Britain, part of Churchill's effort to aid the Eastern Front. Soviet pilots, skeptical at first, soon learned to admire the fighter's climb rate and precision handling. The aircraft flew reconnaissance over Stalingrad and later joined the counterattack that shattered the German Sixth Army. The Spitfire's service with the Soviets remains one of the lesser-known chapters of the war, yet it contributed quietly to one of its greatest victories. In the east, a different enemy threatened. Japan's invasion of Burma cut supply lines to China. The Allied air forces, a mix of Americans, Chinese, and British, faced skilled Japanese pilots flying nimble fighters like the Ki-43, Oscar. When Spitfires arrived in early 1944, they quickly restored air balance. Their presence over the jungle and the Irrawaddy River marked the beginning of Allied air superiority in the region. 6 squadrons of Spitfires helped clear the skies for the retaking of Burma. Out at sea, the aircraft evolved again. The Royal Navy required a carrier-based fighter, leading to the creation of the Seafire. Navalized with an arrestor hook and strengthened undercarriage, it joined British fleets in the Mediterranean and later the Pacific. Pilots praised its power but cursed its short range. By 1945, auxiliary fuel tanks solved much of this limitation, allowing the Seafire to escort bombing raids and hunt submarines. Even as new jet technology loomed, the Spitfire's refinement continued. Each redesign kept pace with enemy innovations. The elliptical wing remained, but under its surface, every system was improved. To mechanics, it was a marvel of accessible design. To pilots, it felt alive, a partner rather than a tool. German. Ace Günther Rall, who flew captured Allied aircraft, later admitted his preference for the Spitfire above all others. Its balance between agility and stability, he said, made it the perfect flying machine. As the Allies surged toward victory, the Spitfire remained a constant presence, a familiar guardian in a changing world. In 1944 and 1945, the aircraft operated from France, Belgium, and eventually captured German airfields. It flew armed reconnaissance missions, strafing retreating convoys and intercepting the last desperate Luftwaffe sorties. By then, the once dominant German Air Force was crumbling. Fuel shortages, inexperienced pilots, and relentless bombing had eroded its strength. Yet even cornered, the Luftwaffe remained dangerous. Dogfights over the Rhine and Holland continued until the final days of the war. When peace finally came in May 1945, the Spitfire had earned a legacy beyond measure. From the first prototype's flight 9 years earlier to the final patrols over Europe, it had evolved through 24 major variants and countless field modifications. More than 22,000 had been built. It had served in every theater of the war, in every role imaginable. Its story, however, did not end with Germany's surrender. The post-war world was restless, divided, and newly armed. In the skies over Greece, Spitfires returned to combat during the Civil War of 1946–49, flown by government forces against communist insurgents. In 1948, they appeared again, this time in the Middle East. Both Israeli and Egyptian pilots flew them, sometimes identical models painted in opposing colors. In one surreal encounter, 2 former allies dueled in British-built fighters over the desert. Through the early 1950s, Spitfires still flew reconnaissance in Korea. Relics of a bygone era, yet still respected by those who flew them. Gradually, jets replaced propellers, and the Spitfire became an artifact of transition, proof that engineering could carry both grace and lethality in equal measure. For Britain, it remained more than a machine. It was the embodiment of a national moment, when survival depended on courage, intellect, and unity. To many, the Spitfire symbolized not war, but endurance, the refusal to yield when the world seemed lost. Its designer, Reginald Mitchell, never lived to see the triumph his creation would bring. But his philosophy endured through Joseph Smith and the thousands who built, maintained, and flew the aircraft. From the women riveting wings in factory halls to the pilots who climbed into narrow cockpits, every individual became part of a greater design. In the closing years of his life, Churchill reflected on those who had kept Britain free. The gratitude of every home in our island, in our empire, and indeed throughout the world, he said, goes out to the British airmen who, undaunted in their challenge and mortal danger, turned the tide of World War. The Spitfire was the instrument of that defiance, its Merlin engine singing above the fields of England, its wings slicing through clouds over France, its shadow crossing the deserts of Africa and the jungles of Burma. It began as a prototype, became a legend, and ended as a timeless emblem of human ingenuity under fire. When its final operational flight concluded and the engine cooled for the last time, those who heard its echo knew they had witnessed not merely the sound of a machine, but of a people refusing to surrender.